All right, can you hear me? Welcome to the last session before lunch. I hope y'all are really excited about this. I'm Jen Bevins. I am the Director of Data Analytics and Enrollment Strategy at Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions. We're at downtown campus, so it's always nice to have an excuse to come visit Tempe. And this presentation is going to be about persistence, outlook, outreach campaigns, and just-in-time student intervention. So kind of a caveat before I get into it, this presentation is a use case for operationalizing data tools. There's a lot of really interesting technical stuff going on under the hood, but this is not that presentation. This presentation is about how to use these tools and set them up in a way that non-technical end users can use them in supporting student success. So please feel free to ask questions as we go. I love questions. So before I get in, I think it's important to explain my role and how weird it is. So I do have kind of a hybrid role in that I am half data analytics and half enrollment strategy. And the enrollment strategy part is really strategic retention initiatives. And so I am kind of the person who's saying, oh, I'm worried about this student, let's work with them. But my role started with just student support stuff. I was not involved in data at all. But as with all good things at work, I asked too many questions and got myself into some trouble. And they said, well, if you're so interested in data and getting all the data, why don't you be our data person? So then my role really shifted. Ooh, my transitions didn't work. So my role really shifted to just data, and building dashboards and reports and ad hoc requests and stuff. But then I was still really struggling with, okay, we've got all of this amazing information and resources available to us. What are we doing with it? And so today I'm kind of both analyst and end user in one package. And I will say for even a smaller college like Watts College, it is too much to execute on both of those pieces. But having kind of both elements really closely linked has had some amazing synergies and has resulted in some cool campaigns and projects. So for those of you who are data folks, I definitely recommend working very, very closely with your with the people on the ground who are doing the initiatives, because it can, sharing brains helps a lot in things like this. So this project started from my student support hat. The question was really, how do we find and help students in need before it's too late? How do we do those just-in-time student interventions? How do I know who I need to talk to in order to do them? For the most part, students were getting referred through individual referrals through faculty and staff. We had an in-house form called the TAPS form, just like a little Google form that they would submit students, or through the Dean of Students Care form. But this is really challenging because it's hard to scale. How do you scale up individual referral at a point, you can only individually refer so many students. And there's lots of students who fall through the cracks. Any of you who have been instructors have noticed that there's that student who sits in the back of your classroom and they never really talk, and you're just like, what is going on with this student? There's always students like that you never really see of or hear from, but they're still struggling. Just because they're not reaching out for help or they're not showing outward signs of struggling doesn't mean they don't need that support. And so how do we find them? We were doing a lot of end of semester outreach campaigns like many colleges. We were doing phone calls, emails, snail mail, like I say carrier pigeon only halfway jokingly, like anything and everything we could possibly try to get to these students. But they were mostly focused at end of the semester because we're trying to get them to enroll in next semester. And it really ran into bandwidth limitations. I mean, we only have so many staff members, and those staff members only have so many hours available to do outreach. But in having all of these conversations at the end of the semester, the comment was always, man, I wish you had reached out for help sooner. Like if we had had this conversation a month ago, I would have had a lot more tools and a lot more solutions available to you. But, since we're talking now, like I don't have as much to offer. And so we wanted to find out how can we have those conversations at a point where there's still things that we can do to help support them. And in thinking about this, it was really important to think about who are the students at Watts College. Watts College has 39.9% first-generation students. So that is, of our students, almost 40% do not have a parent or guardian who graduated with a college degree. For first-generation students, there is a lot of institutional knowledge that they are sometimes lacking. Things like, how do you talk to a professor? What is the bursar? Like, what even is that? There's all kinds of questions, and a lot of times first-generation students can struggle with university administration generally. And the way that you, in education research, they talk a little bit about there's different ways to approach this particular student population, both because of some of the deficits they have, but also because of some of the strengths that they have. And one particularly effective method is proactive intrusive support. If you go to these students, actively seek them out and say, I would like to help you, like let's have a conversation instead of waiting for them to come to you, you're a lot more likely to be able to help them. Continuing generation students are a little bit more familiar with reaching out for help in university systems. So with that, knowing that that's kind of a technique that might work with our students, how do we do that? We're still running into those like end of day, we still have staffing limitations. How can we make that proactive outreach happen? So we looked around and said, is anyone doing regular proactive outreach? And any of you who have worked with admissions or recruitment know that regular proactive outreach is the bread and butter of admissions. They're doing it all of the time. And for our recruitment team in-house, a lot of that was happening by student workers. They would regularly run lists of students in Salesforce and that of prospective students who were in need of outreach. And there was a understanding that, any of you who have worked in a service industry job and are familiar with the concept of if you can lean, you can clean. Very much here, same thing here. If you don't have something else to do, you're working the call lists. That's just kind of the understanding. But by doing this, it really allowed the recruitment team to do that proactive outreach in a systematic way. Students were being identified through campaigns in Salesforce, provided to our student workers, and that regular proactive outreach was happening throughout the semester exactly how we wanted it on the student support side. And again, kind of in terms of thinking of who our students were, peer-to-peer outreach is found to be especially beneficial from first-gen students. It's a little bit less intimidating than staff members coming in and saying, well, this is what we need to do. If you hear it from a peer, it's a little bit less scary. But even with having student worker help, we still really needed to strategize about who to prioritize for that regular outreach. There's still only so many hours in the day. What can we do to identify who is in need of that just-in-time intervention? So we looked at persistence outlook. There is Phil, I was like, Phil, I can't talk about this without acknowledging the amazing team at Actionable Analytics and the fantastic work that you all have done in putting together the persistence outreach metric. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it is a really wonderful composite metric that compiles together data on 100 plus variables, everything from on student demographics to resource usage, and it produces a measure that indicates their likelihood to persist. Is that good? Awesome. I've been thinking about it a lot. And it's really cool because couple of reasons. This model recognizes that student success is affected by a multitude of factors. There's no one or two things that we can look at and say, yes, because they got a negative ASR, therefore they're not going to be successful. It recognizes that there's a lot in play. As the Actionable Analytics team has developed it and worked on it, they have shown that there's a pretty high correlation between the model and actual persistence rates among those students. So we had a pretty high confidence that the students who were being identified through this model were probably the students we needed to be looking at for our outreach. And then kind of again thinking about it, we collect so much data on our students. Why do we not leverage it productively? And instead of having to look at a whole bunch of different measures, this gave us sort of a single measure to worry about and not have to, be quite as complicated in how we're identifying students. So we felt good about this. We said this is the metric we want to work with, but still kind of where do we go with that? How do we pull this data? How do we get it to the people who are going to do the work? So this data lives in many places throughout our kind of data environment. You can see it in Salesforce, it's in the data warehouse, it's in Campaign Builder. And we wanted to find something that was really usable. And my first instinct as an analytics person, I was like, let me just get into Alteryx and we'll like make a nice little report and I'll post it or get it to you, or we can build something in Report Builder. But again, kind of my hesitation is thinking about my end users and who is actually going to run the report, who's actually going to use it, and how do they feel about analytics portal. And it turns out they are a little bit scared of it. I talked to some of the people who might be running this report, and like as soon as I said analytics portal, like you could just sort of see their eyes glaze over. So it seemed like that was not going to be our best option. So we went with Campaign Builder because it was something that's pretty easy to run. The student workers supervisors were going to be the ones running the reports, and so I wanted it very accessible. The other wonderful thing about Campaign Builder is it's very flexible. It was easy for them to adjust features or filters to meet the student bandwidth. Any of you who have worked with student workers will know that some weeks they want to work 20 hours a week, and some weeks they'll give you maybe 2 or 3 hours a week. And so you, as a supervisor of those students, you need to be able to scale the work and say, okay, well, if you're only giving me 3 hours this week, let me get you a short list of the most important students. And to really, the Campaign Builder system really allowed us to prioritize. At some point, they're working on the ability to share campaigns, but for right now, it works really well for us to have a single staff member run the report to share with the student worker so that they can really monitor the campaign progress and kind of adjust some of those filters as needed. So. I'm just talking. Okay, so this is actually, these are the filters we use in the campaign that we are currently using for doing this. As you can see, it's not a very complicated campaign. There's only 5 filters. We do use the primary one kind of importance here is that persistence outlook change amount. So we went back and forth a number of times thinking about, well, why don't we just identify students who have a low persistence outlook, like students that are less likely to persist? We should just focus on them, right? And we thought about it a little bit, and sort of if you kind of dig under the hood with Phil and team a little bit about what goes into persistence outlook, there's all of these different features of a student, and some of them don't change very much. Some of them are demographic features, like if a student is a military student or if a student is a student athlete. Those aren't things that are likely to change much throughout the semester, but there are other elements like library usage or receiving negative ASRs that do change often. And so if we were just focusing on students with low persistence outlook, those students tended to be the same students throughout the semester. Our goal was really to get students kind of just in the nick of time when we still had some ability and to change and impact them in some way. So in looking for an opportunity to change, we wanted to identify students who were having a negative change in their likelihood of persisting. So this is kind of where we settled on the persistence outlook change amount. It's very easy to change the number. I've got it set at -2 right now, but kind of depending on how much my student worker is available, we might change it to -1 if they have tons of time available to work on lots and lots of students. But if they are only have a few hours, I might change it to say -3, and it will give them a very small list of students whose persistence outlook went down 3 points from the week prior. So that's kind of how it's actually set up. It's not very difficult, again, technically difficult, again, for an end user or the supervisor to set this up in their own Campaign Builder account. And this is kind of where the persistence outlook data lives in the Campaign Builder output. There's many fields that come out with the Campaign Builder output. These are the relevant ones in terms of persistence outlook. And so lots of different elements. The one that is most useful to us in our work is this one over here, persistence estimated predictor 1. So as I understand it, this is the kind of number one predictor in the case of the student that is affecting what their persistence outlook level is and changes in it. So in other words, kind of this is the student's biggest problem or biggest barrier in terms of why their persistence outlook might be that. And they are kind of in different codes. Some of them you can kind of tell what it is, even if you look at it a little bit. But some of them are higher, some of them are things that you can change and some are not. And so it's helpful sometimes to look at it. So for example, student, the very top one, federal COA gift accepted percentage. So that indicates that the student's cost of attendance, a large portion of that is being covered by gift aid. And so it's interesting sometimes to see like what is kind of the biggest factor in that student's persistence outlook. It's nice to know it's there, but it doesn't really drive the conversation. It's kind of, we come back to it and we like to look at it sometimes, but it isn't a primary driver of conversations. For the most part, that they're showing up on this report at all is kind of the place we start from. So I take all of my data from Campaign Builder and I plop it into a lovely Google Sheet for my student worker. Sometimes I will clean up the data a little bit so it's not quite so overwhelming and there's not quite so many fields. I have the student worker log their date and time and notes. Usually leaves pretty extensive notes about what's going on in that particular student's life, what is coming out of their conversations. And I also usually leave a kind of a note about what all is going on the campaign. Sometimes I'll have her do other things like, it's enrollment time, I need all these students to enroll. And so usually I'll give her kind of a summary of what the report is at the top. And as well as prioritization. If she's got multiple lists for multiple things, I'll just leave her a note and say, this is your first priority, finish this, and then come back to another list. And that's kind of how we share it back and forth for the most part. And it also gives me sort of dates and times, so I have a record of all the students that she's calling that I can access really easily. So that's kind of how it appears. But sort of what does the actual outreach look like? You've got this list of students that might be struggling. What is that? What do you do with that? So for the most part, almost this work is performed by one student worker. She does about 20 hours a week, and as a retention effort, it's pretty cost effective. We're getting a lot of student outreach and a lot of student contact from that amount of hours rather than devoting a staff member's bandwidth to doing all of this outreach. So from a sort of financial standpoint, it's really effective. And the way that she approached the philosophy of this task is that she is triaging and referring out to services. She is not the fixer of their problems herself. ASU's got lots of resources and solutions, and her job is to connect them with the right person, which is, sometimes it's hard because once you strike up a conversation, you want to provide advice or support. But we've done a lot about, like, you don't have to solve this, you don't have to be the expert. You connect them with the experts. She does refer students to in-house resources within Watts College, ASU, and also community resources more broadly. Many of our students struggle with food insecurity, and so there's lots of community resources for things like I'm gonna go with that one then. Hopefully it's recording. There's a lot of resources throughout the community, and so we try to use everything we've got available to support. Typically the procedure is that she'll first send a text through SMS Magic. We used to do phone calls, but students don't like to answer the phone, and so we typically do it through SMS Magic within Salesforce. Then they send a follow-up email to the ASU email address to just kind of confirm, like, this is not a sketchy person who just texted you, this is really me, I really am an ASU student worker. And then they log their attempts in the advising notes in PeopleSoft so that advisors or other student success staff members can see that we have been having outreach with this student. We've tried to connect with them. We've had a conversation. Kind of the more that we can share with our staff, the better in terms of them being aware of what resources they're connecting with. And so this is interesting because this work really happens on evenings and weekends for two reasons. They, both for our student workers are busy people and they like to have a job that they can do in the evenings and weekends, not when they're in class. But also, it turns out that's when students actually respond. And so it works out well, but as you're kind of reading between the lines, this is very independent work. You know, they're not sitting at a desk in front of me doing this. And so there's a very high level of trust, but also a high level of training for these students because they are functioning independently a lot of time. Very often, the student workers need to escalate cases to me and other staff members. Again, kind of based on those conversations, they are not fixing the problems themselves, they're getting them to us. And so how has it been going? Like, what is all of this turning up? We are finding that it has a lot better response rates to a student doing check-ins than staff members. We've tried to do exactly the same campaign but have a staff member send it out versus a student, and we get way better responses from students. Students overall are feeling positive about this, that they care, that they feel like we care and that we're looking after them, which is wonderful. For the most part, we get a lot of warm fuzzies out of this. Even if students aren't responding or have a lot of problems that they want to talk about, they've said, oh, thanks for checking in, I appreciate that. So that's been really nice just as a message of support to our students. But it has given us a chance to intervene and provide students with resources in a timely manner. Just last week, we had a student whose brother passed away, and our student worker was able to connect them with the medical compassionate withdrawal process so that they were able to withdraw from their classes and, you know, support their family when they needed to and be prepared to come back when they were ready. And so, you know, if we hadn't reached out, the student might have waited until, you know, they got an E grade and kind of had to fix things after the fact. So it's been really helpful. It also gives us more data and kind of qualitative data about non-returning students. We always get those questions from leadership about, you know, what are you hearing? What are the trends that you're hearing about things that our students are running into? And it's nice because if you're, you know, my student worker has had extended conversations with other students about what's going on. And so it gives me a lot more to work with and a lot better responses when people ask me those questions. We have gotten a couple of negative responses, not too many, but mostly it has been kind of in the form of, well, where has this outreach been all the time? Like, why has nobody checked in with me before? And so it really, those negative responses, while sometimes they're a little bit frustrating, it does speak to the need for this kind of outreach in that, you know, students are saying, hey, like, I could have used this a while ago. So it has been reaffirming that this is a productive conversation. 95%, I would say even more than 95% of the time, they say, it's going good. Like literally that is the response. And which is either A, they don't recognize that they're at risk or that they might be struggling, or B, you know, a little bit hesitant to open up that conversation to a random person who just texted them. So kind of how do you further that conversation? How do you support the student who's trying to, you know, pull information out of the other student? Well, our student workers have a whole list of conversation starters. Everything from how are your classes? What's your favorite class? Have you visited the tutoring center yet? Have you gone to any football games? So lots and lots of resources of ways to just kind of warm up the crowd a little bit. Our student worker, we've had a couple, they are aware of the #1 estimator column in that campaign builder output, kind of what it means, and kind of sometimes they'll take a look and see, oh, like I see gift aid might be something really important to you. Like they don't say it, but like in their mind they're like, okay, so gift aid, have you applied to any scholarships? So part of it is, what that's really important in this is seeing the information, but then translating it into a open-ended, friendly conversation, which I will I will follow up in a second. They do have a full working business process guide in terms of, messaging to send and topics and conversations and things like that. It does really help to hire chatty students. As I've been in interviewing for this, I definitely have hired the students who, just even pull information out of me during the interview. Those are the ones you want doing this. We do check in really regularly. I inspect their notes that they're leaving in PeopleSoft to make sure everything is appropriate in terms of leaving FERPA protected information in administrative notes, keeping an eye on their documentation, making sure they're logging dates and times and notes appropriately. But otherwise, it's really a pretty hands-off supervisory relationship. We have once a week we have a one-on-one. We send a few emails here and there, but I would say this is maximum 2 hours a week of supervision, which in terms of sort of supervisory investment in this project, it's not a huge ask there either. Usually when we meet, we are debriefing tough conversations that have popped up, whether they are tough because a student's reaction was disproportionate or tough because a student that they talk to is going through something really challenging. We do some professional development. As an education researcher, I research on trauma-informed practice, which really comes into play with working with students who are in the moment of crisis, as well as kind of sharing some student affairs articles and things like that. And so it really, most of our debriefing or sort of case escalation happens through email, and we really take the time together to kind of work on developing professional competencies. But the important thing is there's a super high level of trust. They know I am always a text away. Because they're doing this on weekends or evenings, text is the easiest way for us to talk. If she needs me to jump in and diffuse something, or they need help knowing how to handle a specific case, like, I'm not sure where do I need to send this to? Or, we had this conversation about mental health. Would you think it's important enough that I need to submit a Dean of Students care form or connect them with MPACT or something? And so they know I'm always a text away. Even though they are working in evenings and weekends, they know that I'm never out of reach. And that trust is really helpful because, I can trust them, they can trust me. And they really take ownership and pride in the project. We can call them student leaders, and that's very much because they are contributing aspects to this that I as a staff member couldn't. I couldn't write the text message in a way that sounds like an 18-year-old wrote it. I can't, send the right emoji or meme or whatever. And so we really, we trust them in terms of communicating professionally, but appropriately for a student. They have written a lot of the scripts and things like that for the texts and the messages and stuff that we're sending. But kind of important thing to talk about, the elephant in the room about this project. I love persistence outlook so much, but if you were a little bit skeptical of it, there is an element of wow, we have so much data and we're looking in on students and predicting who is and isn't gonna persist. And if you were skeptical, I could see how you might ask some questions. But this is really how we address it, and I think we do a really good job of it. The student worker, let's be honest, they do know and understand persistence outlook, how it is calculated, what it means, what are the kinds of things into it. They know kind of where this is all coming from. That's not a mystery to them. But we have a lot of training, and not to acknowledge that this all came from this big metric that's predicting how you're gonna do. We have talked about that extensively, and we have documented it. And they don't even say that data was used to identify a student. There's never even oh, we were running some reports and we thought you might be, running into something. We don't even say anything about data or reports, or oh, we heard you might be struggling, we wanted to do a check-in. It is way even more generic than that, because we don't want to look like we're sort of intruding in a negative way, or we're intruding because they're doing something wrong. We'd never want to give off that impression. Um, and also kind of empathy for it. Like if you were a student and you got this call from somebody, how would you feel if this was the approach that they gave? And so we have talked about that, and honestly, they're students, but they're professionals too, and they know that, there's things that you can share in a workplace, and there's sometimes things that you don't share, and sometimes things that are shared within colleagues and not with end users. And so students have a reasonable sense of this, but really the important part is we let the student workers write the script on what they're going to say. And I review them and kind of go through like, yep, that makes sense, that doesn't make sense. But kind of the initial script, their opener lines, they wrote them. And they use their own voice, their own language. It keeps it really human and approachable. And for the most part, the opening is just, hey, I'm just checking in, seeing how things are going. We're at week 3 of the semester. Like, how have classes been going so far? We never have any indication that we think there might be a problem or that anything flagged them as having a problem. Just keep it very light and very neutral. And a lot of times those conversations will unfold organically. You definitely don't have to force them. And I don't think students are feeling that way because for the most part, the reaction is, oh, I really appreciate it. Someone's looking out for me. Because in a lot of students, there's a sense that ASU is such a big community and I'm just kind of a number in the community. But students who are receiving this outreach have been really positive and like, oh, someone's keeping an eye on me. I appreciate that. And so I don't think it is having any kind of sort of negative feeling. I think it's been going really well in terms of perception. Let's see, that is what I've got for you. So we're doing it, it's working really well. If you are interested in implementing something similar, I would be happy to like chat with you. Any questions? Please. Yeah. So it kind of depends on the week and what issues there are happening. In the first week of the semester, they process way fewer because the conversations were longer and more in depth. I would say in a week, they are calling and texting maybe about 200 students. And a lot of times the follow-up will happen later. They'll send a call or a text, and then a week later the student will finally respond. And so it's a little hard sometimes to calculate individual cases because the second half of the conversation will happen a while later and there's a delay. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. So I have thought about it. Um, as an education researcher, I am very hesitant to ever kind of identify a specific project or initiative as being a causative factor in persistence. Like, as I said, there's so many factors that go into whether a student will persist or not. And I've also thought about like, oh, well, what if we did a control group that gets the outreach and that doesn't get the outreach? But, if we have students only for 4 years, missing out on the outreach for a semester or two is something that might be potentially beneficial is kind of I would rather, do the outreach anyways and, not be 100% positive that it's doing anything than risk not doing that support. So this has been going on for about, at this point, I think about a year and a half. Hmm. Please. Yes, very much so. So typically we prioritize any of our persistence cohorts. So any of the first year persistence cohorts. So obviously this does mean undergrad is higher priority than grad and students who are in their first year here at ASU. Typically, if I go level by level, first year students, then seniors is typically. But I also tend to deprioritize a little bit ASU Online because there are so many other support systems in place for ASU Online students that I would rather focus our efforts on campus immersion students. Yeah. 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 Um, I tend to find the beginning of semesters little bit less at the end of semesters because students are busy, like beginning of semester, end of semester, but definitely more in the beginning, especially beginning of fall, because there's so many people who are new on campus and just kind of figuring out the lay of the land. And to a certain extent, they're still kind of new and not yet jaded with all of the communications they get. And so they're just a little bit more likely to respond. Hmm. Hmm. Yes, so let me try to think. So we'll usually, I kind of will do a like, remove the students that we have talked to the week prior and kind of give them at least like a week or two to kind of do their thing. Do follow up. Typically, that's when I will come through and sort of if they are not responsive to the student outreach, then that's when I come through and kind of come at it from a staff member perspective. I tend to email because that's a little bit more sort of genuine and authentic coming from me. And so, some students take the email outreach more seriously than a peer-to-peer text. So kind of approaching it from two different styles and techniques is also helpful. Yeah. Hmm. So I asked the student worker about this. She said they'll either reply like more or less immediately or the next day. It's every once in a while, she's like, yeah, I'll get somebody from like a text that I sent weeks and weeks ago. But for the most part, it's usually within 24 hours. Yeah, in the back. Yeah, for sure. So in terms of the first question and how the data gets into Campaign Builder, it is already loaded. I am not manually loading anything in there. That it's Jennifer. Do you want to Jennifer Wilkin? Can you help me explain Campaign Builder a little bit more? Okay, so I'm so sorry. So no, Campaign Builder, all of the warehouse data is already linked, so end users are not having to go in and make the connections themselves. They're able to sort of create campaigns and build filters and stuff, but they aren't having to make any of the data connections themselves, and it outputs into a nice little CSV at the end. Yes, and Phil is definitely the person to talk to in terms of how the sausage is made for persistence outlook. Please. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, please. Yes. We are connected with them to a certain extent. This is at this point we've been doing it for 2.5 semesters, almost three. And so it's still a little bit in the pilot phase, so we haven't been connecting super directly. But at least with the success coaches that work in our college, they're all aware of it. And since we are logging all of our notes and advising notes, they can see the outreach that we have been doing. So they can see kind of the conversations that we are having. Hmm. Yeah. Mhm. Not really, because all the different academic units, kind of retention initiatives are handled by different people. And so a lot of them are handled by kind of the advising folks, but some colleges, it's a little bit different. We don't have anything nearly as formal as the Council of Academic Advisors. That's true, Student Success Leadership Council. The closest thing. Yeah, that's probably the closest. Hmm. I think we've got one last question in the back and then it's lunch. Oh. Yeah. Hmm. Um, so in terms of our student population, 90% of the time, these outreach campaigns are focused on persistence outlook. There are other sort of elements and activities that are more college specific that we do other outreach campaigns through, kind of through the same stream, but the driver of the campaign is not persistence outlook. So particularly one of the degrees within our college is the bachelor's of social work, and applying for the practicum, finding an internship location, doing the paperwork, that is a major stumbling block for many students. And so when it's in that about that time in the spring, we will regularly do outreach to those students to make sure that they are kind of in the right spot. And frankly, a lot of times those kind of college specific things will come up anyways, because those students might not be enrolled yet because they haven't gotten their placement. And so a lot of times we'll catch them and kind of we'll catch them in this process. But we do some college specifics campaigns, not through persistence outlook, but through the same kind of method. And the other thing sort of that is college specific is the student worker who's doing it is a future social worker. And so it's a really great opportunity for them to practice those social working skills and some of their future professional competencies. And so kind of the position in and of itself is kind of college specific, because it's not a formal placement, but does give them a chance to start practicing some of those skills.